Wherever you go in the world, the food of the street represents the identity of the people. Clues to culture, race, and religion can be found in the local cuisine. In one way, demonstrating how life in the 21st century, more than any other time, has been determined by the migration of races and cultures. On an island off the northwest coast of Malaysia, multiculturalism is not an idealistic ambition, it is simply a way of life. Ethnic Malays, Indians and Chinese live side by side, producing a melting pot in a city renowned for the fabulous food served up by roadside vendors. Forget about the holiday brochures and the tourist traps. Through this series, we'll show you what life is like for the ordinary people on the streets of the world. This is street food, and this is Penang. Poverty and struggle is a common story for migrant families, but often leads to inspirational lives.
Yes, yes.
At his street corner store, Chia Ming Kin is still making the same dish which provided him with a livelihood and has helped him raise his family. He's been doing this for half a century. In his 80s, it's been a long road from when he first arrived on the island as a boy.
I didn't go to school. I was 12 years old. I did odd jobs. There was hardly any work available. I would help other people, washing dishes, serving tables. I didn't have an education. It's just how it was.
But more than 60 years later, Ming Kin is now famous in Penang for his lo mee, a rich gravy-like soup with noodles. His sons have been at his side from an early age, not just inheriting their father's skills, but a work ethic that is typical of such stall owners.
Yeah, I remember that even we have 365 days a year, but he works 367. No? That's in between the 2 days of the Chinese New Year, he works 48 hours, non-stop. We don't close.
I feel, many of these people who are actually immigrants years ago, many of them are not very highly educated, and of course, to have a big shop takes a lot of money to start a business, and not every people, can afford that. And so therefore, they start small hawkers places like what you see here.
Chef Wan has gained worldwide recognition for his knowledge of the region's food.
And don't forget, if you interview many of these hawkers, they're so proud. Many of their kids are doctors, are lawyers, they're very successful, And imagine having a father who's for 20 or 30 years doing the same thing over and over and again. It's all about having the pride, about having the passion. To me, that's success.
This is true of Ming Kin's son. It Kiang, learning from his stall owner father, he now runs an upmarket restaurant, serving up the same food he watched his father cook on the street.
In my heart, I'm always thankful for my parents. They already set up the business and I just follow their footsteps, which I don't have to struggle for 10 or 20 years to achieve that status. No?
And one of the most popular dishes on offer at It Kiang's place is the lo mee recipe handed down by his father. But how does his dad think this dish compares to the family recipe? When it comes to food critics, Ming Kin is the toughest of them all. After all, he's been making lo mee for over 50 years.
And he has to think.
He's thinking
Look at
about
he's thinking, tengah fikir ni.
Aha.
Yes, no,
Yes, no.
Wow, that's a long time to ponder, isn't it?
Sedap.
Macam mana? Sedap? Bagus? Oh.
Bagus kan. Okay.
Not much different.
Not much different, huh?
Not much different.
I thought for a while he's choking.
Ming Kin seems impressed, but he needn't worry about being driven out of business. Because the very same dish served up in It Kiang's restaurant is available for a fraction of the price at his father's stall. Because in a city where unskilled workers earn less than $100 a month, a meal for a single dollar is both affordable and satisfying. Penang's history as a trading port continues to shape its culture. Many people came as labourers more than 200 years ago and simply stayed. Although they brought with them much more than their food, it's through this food that we are given a window into the lives of ordinary people. The people that give a place its soul, its flavour, its identity.
Everywhere you go here in Penang, there are reminders of the heritage of this place, ancestral footprints that are testament to times long past. These clan jetties were established more than 100 years ago, but people continue to live here.
Dato Key's ancestors were immigrants who arrived by sea in huge junks from mainland China.
My great-grandfather came in one of these boats. They then worked for people for a year to pay back their fare, and finally decided that there were so many opportunities here, and through sheer hard work, they could then found their fortune.
And Dato has also benefited from this good fortune, becoming a respected politician whose knowledge of the island has earned her the affectionate title of Madam Penang.
At that time, the women didn't come, so you have male cooks were brought to cook the food, which we call now economy rice. Rice is a staple food, and the chef will have a lot of little dishes to eat with the rice. And it has been continued till today. For a small amount of money, you can get a hearty meal.
And the locals are still taking advantage of the cheap and cheerful food sold in the streets of Penang. It's a 24-hour operation, little time for rest as the city comes alive at night. The onset of darkness triggers a vibrant explosion of colour. And of course, more eating. People are drawn to places like this, Gurney Drive, whose night markets seem to stretch along the entire foreshore. Hundreds of snack stalls that attract hungry diners until the small hours of the morning.
It's the middle of the night. There are hundreds of people here eating merrily.
Isn't that fabulous? Look at that. You know, in Malaysia, it's always the word makan, makan, makan. Instead of saying manjara, manjara, manjara.
Eat.
With Chef Wan as my guide, this is the ideal place to explore the geographical influences that have helped shape Penang's cuisine. And where better to start than a plate of rojak, a signature dish whose sweet, sour, bitter and salty flavours provide a metaphor for the social recipe that has produced Penang's identity.
There's a lot of influence from our neighbour Thailand. Yeah? When you go down south, our neighbour from Indonesia, Java, Padang, Aceh and all that. And then north also this particular area, because of the Indian Muslim that arrived to the shore. And so they brought their culture, their food, from India. You know, so with all the curries and all the spices and everything. So it's not Malay, it's not totally Indian, but it's somewhere in between.
People come back time and time again. Everyone has their favourite stall. Tough competition for those trying to break into the local consumer market.
Every time we come back to Penang, we just have to be here. We just have to come here.
Why you choose this place? Why you can eat it
variety.
Well, you don't want to go to McDonald's.
Food here has evolved to become an art form, a social spectacle, a live display of one's ethnic roots.
This is of Indian influence.
Indian
Yes.
influence, yeah.
That time mana Southern India.
Yeah.
Because his family ancestors come from Southern India.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he is quite well known in
Oh,
Gurney
yeah.
Drive,
Yeah,
isn't he?
Yeah, he's famous.
A one-man enterprise, but not a one-man show, because here in Penang, you'll find many others like him. Every morning in Penang, a hive of activity begins in pre-dawn darkness. A daily ritual where meat is slaughtered and prepared, fresh produce is cleaned and packaged, and an abundance of seafood is brought from the ocean to market. Measured and sold, much of this produce is delivered to the roadside restaurants, which have become icons of Penang's street food culture.
This is one of the dishes that's made Penang street food so famous. It's asam laksa. It's a spicy, sour fish soup base to which they add rice noodles, lettuce and cucumber, as well as pineapple, shallots and ginger bud. But it wouldn't be complete without one essential ingredient.
To find it, I'm making the coastal journey down to the southwest of Penang.
It's a whole different world up there.
Away from the hectic urban life of Penang's cityscape, you find a tranquil rural setting, dotted with curious faces and small villages. I've come to meet a man, Mr. To, who has devoted his life to making a simple product that adds the punch to many dishes here. These clay-like clumps laying in the sun are belacan, a traditional shrimp paste used by hundreds of street vendors that is made by a natural process of fermentation.
You take baby shrimp, season it with salt, and then leave it to dry in the sun. Then you grind it and pound it and let it ferment. Then you mold it.
Belacan, though, produces such a pungent smell, it's quite overpowering. For Mr. To, his product is like a fine red wine. The aromatic bouquet tells him it's properly matured. It's obviously an acquired skill.
The smell of belacan is very fragrant. People are used to eating with this smell. They must add belacan or the food won't taste nice.
The smell of success. But it wasn't always the case. A wander around the property reveals the history of one migrant family. Disused pig pens lie empty. The remnants of the business started by Mr. To's father when he arrived in Penang more than 5 decades ago. The business went bust, and the family moved into belacan production. They now employ dozens of local workers. Like many people here, Mr. To is a modest man, slightly embarrassed when I refer to him as the king of belacan. And now, with his son by his side, production has moved toward the lucrative export market. But nearly half of his annual production is still sold directly to street food vendors, who use simple ingredients to great effect. This is Mr. Lim, and as his old black and white photos show, he's been working on this footpath for many years. He's a one-man manufacturing machine, making popia, pastry skins for spring rolls. And his method of preparation is mesmerizing to watch.
What you buy from the supermarket is made by machine. It's not the same as handmade.
And each day they're handmade in their hundreds. And Mr. Lim has often struggled to keep up with demand.
I used to work a minimum 12 hours a day, but not anymore. I'm an old man already. Now my bones are old and I can only work 6 hours.
His customers represent a cross-section of Penang's multicultural community.
People of all races buy it, Westerners, Malays, and Indian. Most importantly because there's no pork.
Mr. Lim's food is halal, prepared in accordance with Islamic practices in order to satisfy his many Muslim shoppers. But it's not only Muslims. Penang is also home to large communities of Buddhists and Hindus. And when you look at the food and the faces in the city streets, what you're really seeing is the byproduct of history, the movement of different people, of differing faiths throughout a region.
When the waves of immigrants first arrived here in Penang, they brought with them not just their food and culture, but also their religions. This is the Ku Kongsi in the heart of the old city, and it's places like this that continue to add to the rich flavour of this place.
Buddhism brought by Chinese railroad workers, Indian Hindus and Muslims who arrived as labourers to tend rubber plantations, and local Malays who also follow Islam.
I think each of them respect each other's religion, each other's customs and their habits. And in Malaysia we have this word called tolerance. You have to tolerate each other in order to live in harmony.
Teresa Pereira is a Heritage Trust guide in Penang, but her tours give visitors a unique taste. A 3-course introduction to food, culture and history.
On the heritage tours, we actually show the guest exactly what's out there. We don't want to change anything, but if you're moving into Little India and you see the guy making the tea, for instance, a teh tarik, we want to show them how it's made.
Of Sri Lankan and Indian descent, Teresa explains not only the ancestry of her own people, but all the communities. Communities which have grown through the ready availability of work.
They all know they have opportunities in Malaysia to work here, And also it's because generations, their fathers used to work here, the great-great-grandfathers used to. So it's from the generations that's been passed down. And when the father comes, he brings the little son with him, and it's been going on for years.
But this is no easy life. Working long hours for the promise of a small return.
This is Samsudin. He makes the best samosas in Malaysia, I would say.
Hi, Samsudin.
How are you, Samsudin? He gets up in the morning at 6 because he has to prepare all these things before he comes.
Right, of course.
And until 10 at night, every day.
And he's making them a mile a minute. Yeah.
And this is his own recipe of pastry, which he never gives away to anyone.
It's a recipe for good business, and his customers quite obviously agree. He may make 500 samosas today, but it's just enough to live, pay his bills, and save a little for his family. And despite the success stories of those who have gone on to better things, this is the harsh reality for most street vendors. They will continue their trade, just as their ancestors did, often in the same streets that their relatives occupied. Yet they remain proud of this heritage.
We don't want changes. Changes where you just sweep everything under the carpet and make it clean, because that's not what guests want to see, We want to keep the everyday life in Georgetown, the cultures, the way they live, the traditions that come with it, keep it all intact.
But changes are occurring. Many of the charming homes where people have lived for years are disappearing. Development has been inevitable. High-rise buildings now dominate the coastline. But the architecture of the past also needs to be preserved.
To me, the destruction of a heritage building is like the removal of a page of history.
A wander with Dato Key through the Blue Mansion, which has been lovingly restored, makes you realise just how important all the facets of Penang's identity are.
Heritage is not just the buildings and the roads. Heritage is actually the people, the people's lifestyle, way of life, the ambience of a city, and that should be preserved. So we want to capture that, and the endangered traits, should actually be preserved.
There's just time for a final tour of the city. And what better way than in a traditional trishaw?
He has been riding this trishaw for over 35 years. To me, they are Penang's heritage product, which is priceless.
Penang's history and culture is one of immigration and poverty, yet success is building common ground between races. The island's street life and food reflects that. Throughout this series, we'll look at many places where the struggles of the ordinary man and woman have helped build wonderful cities and produced amazing cuisine. Join us again next week on Street Food.